Ahoy! There are some, at least somewhat weird things going on with New World at the moment when it comes to the whole server status situation. So many of you may be aware at this point that New World database no longer displays the amount of players per server. This data is no longer available. You can see that if you look at the most recent days here, there's just red showing, and this was already the case for some of the open beta servers, specifically in AP Southeast and SA East. So I guess they were kind of testing what happens if they just shut it off, if it can still be tracked, which seemingly it cannot. And along with that, we can now see new values here. These are an estimation. Zio has implemented a functionality on a newer database, which is basically taking the Steam player count and then estimating the average player count through that, plus the historical data that's available. But obviously that will not be very accurate for very long, because that just using the Steam data means in the long run we won't know what player count we have on the individual consoles, and the consoles don't publish official data about their player counts the same way that Steam does. This is a very cool thing that Steam does in terms of transparency, but other companies are not doing the same. That of course means that we will get less information in the future. Now, this is of course kind of odd coming off the back of this beta, and you can somewhat ascribe it some malicious intent possibly. Before we get deeper into the topic, real quick, if you want to get early trading tips for the expansion, I posted a really important one on my Patreon that will allow you to make a lot of gold once the expansion comes around, a lot of coin. So if you're interested in that, feel free to support me there, and thanks to my patrons who already do that. I want to show you the open beta total concurrent population here. I don't know who made these graphs, I'm sorry, I found these on Mikro's video, but these show us how many players we had maximum playing at the same time at certain points during the beta. So we had a total of 30,000 roughly concurrent players, and again this was without measuring two regions. Those are not massive regions, so maybe it's another 5,000 players on top or something. But anyways, it's a big number altogether when you consider that concurrent players means that a lot more players in total tried it. So it must have been 100,000 plus players that actually tried out the open beta, which is still not nearly the same number as we had on the open beta for PC, but it is a very significant number. And we're also seeing a lot of positive feedback from the beta, specifically from console players that are new to the game, or also from PC players that came back after a very long break and thought that the changes were exciting. This return of players is also reflected in the Steam charts. If you look at the last month, then you can see we have like these very small bumps to like 3K, sometimes 4K, maybe close to 5K here. But now we're having some very significant increases of 6,000, 7,000 concurrent players, and we're not even at the weekend yet, so we're likely to see more increases here in the next days as some players are coming back. Sure, some players are just preparing for the expansion, but again, some players that haven't played for a very long time are also genuinely excited about the changes, and considering they can play most of them without paying anything, I guess they're just gonna try them out and give them a spin. And that is gonna probably increase quite a fair bit further until launch, as people kind of maybe want to get back to it. And obviously at launch we'll have a massive spike because there will be fresh start servers, and many players don't want to come back yet because then they would be on the legacy servers and they'd rather play on fresh start, which makes perfect sense. But this of course begs the question, why are they removing the player count now? And I think the answer is fairly obvious, because you can't accuse them of having a dead game when you can't actually see the player count. So any negative reputation in that regard would be decreased. I don't think they are benefiting much as a company, AGS, Amazon Games, from us knowing the player count. I think that's probably, financially speaking, hurting them more by seeing that people don't want to come back because they're seeing low player counts, rather than benefiting them. And again, Steam will no longer be an indicator by itself, because there could be 0 Steam players and there could still be 100,000 console players. We wouldn't actually know. So them being less transparent here is definitely negative for us, but it might not be negative for them. And what's especially unfortunate about that is that you won't see the individual player populations that you'll have on individual servers, so you won't actually know which server is particularly populated or not, which server is better to go to, where you should create your character and so on. So this has certain repercussions. I will say that this is not unusual for games in general though. It is rather unusual for games to make all of their player data publicly available. Generally, for most games, you have to guesstimate purely based on the Steam charts, and if it's a game that is on multiple platforms, then all the other numbers are usually estimations unless the company behind it goes out of their way to actually make that data available. So while this is definitely a downgrade, I don't think it's a very surprising one, and I also don't think that it'll have a massive impact by itself on the player population. They may very occasionally lose a player here or there who ends up on a dead server because they couldn't tell which server is actually full, but those will probably be outliers because many of them will also just transfer to another server instead. But again, of course, we could ascribe malicious intent to this. This could be because they are planning to not really do much post-launch and just hide the declining player population resulting from that from us, so we don't even know that the game is no longer doing well through that data. Again, we still have Steam data, so we'll have something to look into, but it might not really be enough, and at that point we might not be able to get the full picture from that anymore, which would be very unfortunate. It is possible that they are just turning this off for now, because there's really not much value in tracking the player count right now until we come to the point where the console release is actually happening, and they then show all the servers, all the new servers with all their data, so they can kind of flex and say, hey look, now everyone's back, there's so many players across all servers, it's worth coming back. Small possibility here, I don't think it's likely, more wishful thinking if anything, but theoretically possible. Also, on a side note, Mail Oreo linked me something very interesting today that I wanted to show you as well. We were talking about aim assist a lot in the most recent days. We remember multiple videos at this point probably about the snap lock and so on. And I found this to be very interesting. So Jib Smart is working on aim assist in Fortnite and is working specifically on a human-like aim assist that is meant to not give you any disadvantages in situations where you're normally going to play similarly, like in a situation where it's easy to aim, but it's gonna make it not so robotic in some situations where you are essentially reacting better than a player can or would normally. So, for example, the perfect tracking at very close range where you very easily rotate, like, 100% precision, 180 with an ability like Flurry. That is something that would probably be prevented through that. And I thought it's interesting that other games are looking into this, and it would be fantastic if New World was going to do the same. Again, very doubtful they would, but if they did, it would be great. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. And if you'd like to support me further and get the early trading tips for the expansion, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.